Still recording. Hello, it's me again, Chaz. This is now episode 3 of the FIFA Members France videos. These ones will focus on the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Hope you enjoy. Now, because of World War II, the World Cup in 1942 and then the World Cup in 1946 was abandoned for obvious reasons. So the next World Cup was in 1950. Brazil was the hosts of the 1950 World Cup. France were in Group 3 for qualifying. They had to play Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia themselves had to play Israel first, and they beat them twice, home and away. Then they played France. Both the games between France and Yugoslavia ended in 1-1 draws in the qualification stage, both home and away for both teams. Their third game was played in a neutral stadium in Italy. Yugoslavia went on to beat France 3-2 after extra time. FIFA did offer France a place at the 1950 World Cup. At first they accepted it, but later on declined. So France didn't play in the 1950 World Cup. That was the very first World Cup they didn't attend. 1954 now. This World Cup was the very first World Cup back in Europe after World War II. Switzerland were the hosts for this World Cup, and France was able to qualify for this one. France were in Group 4 with the Republic of Ireland and Luxembourg. So similar to 1934, where they had Luxembourg in their group, they have them in their group again. This time, instead of nations playing each other once, they would have to play each other 2 times home and away. France beat Luxembourg again 6-1 in the qualifiers. Then they went on to beat Ireland 5-3. Both of those games were away. And then they beat Republic of Ireland again 1-0 at home. And then beat Luxembourg 8-0 at home. Just Fontaine scored a hat-trick in that game for France against Luxembourg. France comfortably topped their group and qualified for the World Cup in 1954. In 1954 World Cup, the group stages were different from the 1950 and the 1930 World Cup. So instead of a round robin where every nation will play each other once, which would have been a total of 6 matches, instead there was a total of 4 matches in each group. So there were 16 nations, 4 groups of 4. Each group had 2 nations that were top ranked and 2 nations that wasn't ranked. Now, the ranked nations will play both of the unranked nations, but they won't play each other in that group. The unranked nations won't play each other, but they will play both of the ranked nations. France was in a group with Brazil, Yugoslavia, and Mexico. France and Brazil were the seeded teams, the top ranked teams, while Yugoslavia and Mexico wasn't. Surprisingly though, the unranked or unseeded team, Yugoslavia, defeated France 1-0. Milutinov was the scorer for Yugoslavia in that game. France did go on to beat Mexico, this being the second time those two nations meet at a World Cup. But regardless of the result, Brazil and Yugoslavia drew their match, which knocked out France without no further game being played. Brazil and Yugoslavia both finished with 3 points each. Brazil topped the group with a bigger goal difference, while France finished third with 2 points, and Mexico were eliminated. Both Brazil and Yugoslavia end up losing to the two nations that went on to play each other in a final. That was West Germany and Hungary. Brazil losing to Hungary 4-2, and Yugoslavia losing to West Germany 2-0. So that was the second time that France got knocked out of the group stage and finished third, Mexico being in their group and finishing fourth. Now, in the 1958 World Cup, Sweden were the hosts. In the 1950s, UEFA, CAF, the AFC were all formed. The CONMEBOL was formed decades before them. Again, there was 16 spots for the 1958 World Cup. 2 of them spots was taken. Sweden as hosts and West Germany as the World Cup winners of the 1954 World Cup. UEFA was given another 9 places to compete at the World Cup. The CONMEBOL was given 3. The CONCACAF was given 1. While the CAF and AFC was joined together and they were given 1 spot to compete. The AFC and CAF World Cup qualifiers had a lot of withdrawals for many reasons. Israel were the nation to go through, but didn't play 1 game. So because they didn't play 1 match at all, FIFA put a rule that you must play at least 1 game to qualify. So Israel would go on to play Wales in a playoff, and Wales was able to qualify in that last spot. Well, anyway, we're talking about the French team. So France were in Group 2 in the UEFA Zones World Cup qualifiers in 1958. Their group had Belgium, who they played in the 1938 World Cup. They also had Iceland in their group. France comfortably topped their group. Their first game was against Belgium, where they won 6-3. Szysłowski scored 5 goals in that game. And then they went on to play Iceland and beat them 8-0 at home. And then again 5-1. Szysłowski scoring 2 goals in that game as well. Finally, they played Belgium. That game ended 0-0, which saw France go through and qualify for the 1958 World Cup. So at the World Cup in 1958, France was put into Group 2. They had Yugoslavia. So similar to the 1954 World Cup, they had them again in their group. The other 2 nations were Paraguay and Scotland. France beat Paraguay 7-3. As I mentioned before, that is France's highest goals they scored at a World Cup. Just Fontaine scored a hat-trick in France's opener against Paraguay. And those goals were the first of 13 that Just Fontaine would score. He would score for 2 goals for France, but Yugoslavia beat them 3-2 in their next game. This being the second time Yugoslavia beat France at a World Cup in a row. But France went on to secure qualification to the next round by beating Scotland 2-1 from Just Fontaine. Again scored. That's 5 goals in 3 games at that point. France topped their group. So France was top of their group, Yugoslavia second. France would then go on to play another home nation, this time Northern Ireland they played, after beating Scotland, and they beat them 4-0. Fontaine scoring another 2 goals in that game. Just crazy. But then they go on to play Brazil in the semi-finals. Fontaine does score in this game, equalising after Valval scored the opener for Brazil, but a hat-trick from Pelé stopped France's hopes. France do play in the third place playoffs where they beat Germany 6-3. Fontaine scored 4 goals in that game, making that 13 goals in 6 games at one World Cup. No players ever come close since. No players actually reached double digits, I believe, since 58 at one World Cup. Eusebio for Portugal in 1966, he did score 9 goals. So that's the closest to double digits at a one single World Cup. So yeah, it's a remarkable record by Just Fontaine. Phenomenal. He never got a chance to play at another World Cup, though. Let's move on to the 1962 World Cup. France actually didn't qualify for this World Cup after reaching third in 1958. So they were in Group 2 of the UEFA World Cup qualifiers. They were in the same group as Bulgaria and Finland. And now that France did beat Bulgaria and Finland, they beat Finland at away, and they beat Bulgaria at home. They beat Finland 2-1 and then beat Bulgaria 3-0. Wyszynski scoring in both of those games. And again, scoring against Finland again when France beat them 5-1. But Bulgaria did beat France 1-0. Now that put both France and Bulgaria level on points with 6 points at the time. Again, remember back then, a win would give you 2 points. Also, back then, there was no goal difference to separate the teams. So France and Bulgaria would go on to play each other in a neutral stadium. This in the legendary San Siro in Italy. Bulgaria went on to beat France 1-0. And Bulgaria qualified for that World Cup. So that's 2 World Cups that France didn't qualify. But in 1966, France do make it back into the World Cup. They were in Group 3 in the UEFA zone for the 1966 World Cup qualifying rounds. England were the hosts of that World Cup. Let me note that the 1962 World Cup, Chile were the hosts for that one. Group 3 was a group of 4 nations in it: France, Norway, Yugoslavia, and Luxembourg. Luxembourg, France have met a few times in their groups for World Cup qualifiers. I believe 2 previous times I mentioned. And in the actual World Cup proper, Yugoslavia and France have been in the same group. But in this World Cup qualifiers, only one team was able to qualify, and that was France. France had a good start, beating Luxembourg 2-0 at Luxembourg. Then went on to beating Norway 1-0. But they lost to Yugoslavia again. However, they beat Norway 1-0, same result this time. And finally was able to beat Yugoslavia. Gondet scoring in the 77th minute as reported against Yugoslavia. Gondet went on to score in another 2 goals with Combin, both scoring 2 goals each against Luxembourg in their 4-1 win, meaning that France topped their group and was able to qualify for the 1966 World Cup in England. France were put in the same group as the hosts nation, England, in Group 1, as well as the 2-time World Cup winners, Uruguay, was in their group, and Mexico. Mexico and France both being in the same group in the very first World Cup, and was the very first World Cup match. The previous two times France and Mexico played each other, France won 2 of those games. This time Mexico was able to draw with France, 1-1 draw. And that was the only point France was able to get because they lost to Uruguay 2-1. And they lost to the host nation, who would go on to win the World Cup, England, 2-0, 2 goals from Roger Hunt. So not a good showing for France at the 66 World Cup. And the first time Mexico finished above France in a group at a World Cup. France would go on to miss the 1970 World Cup in Mexico and the 1974 World Cup in Germany. This would be the first time that France missed out on 2 World Cups in a row. In 1970, they were in a group of 3 with both Sweden and Norway. France have Norway in their group again, similar to the 1966 World Cup qualifiers. France lost the first game against Norway in this qualifiers at home, but France was able to beat Norway back in Norway 3-1. Ravelli scored a hat-trick in that game, but then they lost to Sweden 2-0 away, but again was able to avenge their loss and beat Sweden 3-0. Sweden were able to beat Norway twice, which put them on 6 points, 2 points in front of France, meaning France was unable to qualify for that World Cup. And again, in 1974, they wasn't able to qualify. Russia, at the time Soviet Union, and the Republic of Ireland were in their group. France ended up bottom of their group in the 1974 World Cup qualifiers. They beat the Soviet Union once by beating them 1-0 in their very first match, but then went on to lose to the Republic of Ireland 2-1. They did get a point by drawing their next game to the Republic of Ireland, but finally lost to Soviet Union 2-0. And that meant France failed to qualify for that World Cup. But, in Argentina, France do qualify after missing out on 2 World Cups in 70 and 74. 2 nations that have been in their groups before, both Bulgaria and Republic of Ireland were in their group. It was a group of 3. Group 5, France was in. They topped their group with 5 points. Started their group off with a 2-2 draw away against Bulgaria. Platini scored in that game. He scored again in France's 2-0 win over the Republic of Ireland. However, when France returned and played the Republic of Ireland, they lost 1-0. But France finished off their World Cup qualifying campaign beating Bulgaria 3-1. Platini scored once again for France. So at the time, after missing 2 World Cups, France was able to return in 1978. There was a different format in the 1978 World Cup. Just like the 1974 World Cup, there was actually 2 group phases. Unfortunately for France, they couldn't get out of the first group phase. And again, for the second World Cup in a row that they have qualified for, France was put in a group with the host nation, and that was Argentina. And similar to 1966, they again were put in a group with a nation that has won the World Cup at least 2 times at that time, and that was Italy. Hungary, who also were runners-up at 2 World Cups, they were also in their group. France started off well when they opened up the scoring against Italy, Licombi scored in the very first minute, but Italy finished that game 2-1. Then they played the host nation, Argentina, and they lost 2-1 as well in that game. Platini did score a penalty to equalise, but it wasn't enough. France did go on to beat Hungary 3-1, but it didn't matter because both Argentina and Italy qualified. Italy finished top of that group, Argentina second. Argentina went on to winning that World Cup. All right, then. That was episode 3 of the FIFA members France World Cup history. I covered the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Episode 4 would focus on the 80s and the 90s. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. And bye.